You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
Episode 51 of the 21.5 Professional Pilots Podcast. Dylan and Max, back again.
Hey now.
Well, we patted ourselves on the back last episode for making it to 50 episodes, and then we kind of run out of stuff to talk about by episode 51. So
that's it. Anyway, thanks for being a fan.
We made it to 50. It was a bet. Well, we had big...
We never run out of stuff to talk about. The funny thing is now, every time we start to talk about something, like, one of us always goes, stop, just don't say anything more.
Yeah, we got to.
We don't want to have the same
Yeah.
conversation because then it doesn't sound organic.
Yeah, we got to save it all for this. Well, we had grand plans to do of the bidding disasters episode, and we put a call out on social media and a few other places to get stories, and nobody sent in any stories.
We've got one great one.
We've got a few good ones, yeah,
but
not enough for an episode yet. So we're going to table that one for another couple
weeks. So if you like the show,
yeah,
you need to contribute to the show.
Even if,
when we ask, if you have a story, you got to help us out.
Yeah. Well, and even if it's, I'll even take the, I heard the story in the crew room from the guy that, did X, Y, Z. So we look forward to more.
We're not
submissions.
specific.
Yeah.
Just looking for
They
a
don't
good
even
story.
have to be true.
Yeah. Make one up. We don't care.
So, yeah, we will table that one till a couple more weeks. Send us that at info@215podcast.com. Or hit us up on the socials.
Even an anonymous message via our website would be acceptable.
That's right.
Via the forum.
Mm-hmm. Lots of ways to reach out. Let's get into some donation shout-outs really quick. Got a couple this week.
David B. and Keith P. Thank you very much for helping to support the show. We certainly appreciate it. Podcasting's not free, believe it or not.
Exactly. I have a sad story to tell about donations. We have, so when folks make donations, then I usually write them a card, send them some stickers and stuff. And so the mailbox at my house is one where if you're going to send an outgoing, you kind of leave it halfway sticking out of the slot so that the post person can see the uncanceled
Don't you just
postage.
have a flag that you put up?
No, not my mailbox. You stick it halfway out. I know it's annoying.
That sounds like a horrible system.
It's a horrible
Get a Post-it note and put it on the side.
It's a horrible system. So, but that's what the mail person said. That's what we're supposed to do. So we come home middle of the day, and I wrote a bunch of cards to a bunch of listeners to send out. They were all sitting in my mailbox. I went to the gym. I came home. My mailbox is hanging wide open. It's a howly, gusty wind, and all the mail is gone. I have no idea where it went. So I got to resend a bunch of stuff. I don't know. Maybe who knows where it is.
So I guess
the farm next to my house might have a lot of 21.5
that is
stickers.
a horrible
It was a bummer
way to do things.
Yeah, it was a bummer. So I got to think of a new system. So I apologize for the delay, but we'll get the rest of that out. To folks in the meantime, speaking of mail, what came in the mail the other day was the Harvey Watt Medical Bulletin.
I saw that. The email.
Yeah.
He means.
I was paging through it, and they were talking a lot. Well, there's a lot of different good topics in there about diet and other things, but they had all these top benefits of morning exercise. Have you?
I've always heard about that. I mean, it's always best to exercise in the morning because it keeps your metabolic rate elevated through the day, and you burn more calories.
And plus, from a habit standpoint, it's easier to do it in the morning before your day gets going and everything else.
Sure.
So my question, though, was, we're opposed in what we prefer airline schedule wise. I like to fly the PMs, and you kind of like to fly the AMs,
that's
right?
where you're wrong. I want to like to fly the PMs. I want to be a PM guy.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't. And the problem is I want to be a PM guy because I want to, it's more fun. It's the crews are more lively. It's more like you come in and you can have a drink at night and hang out with everybody. And it's just more social. Yeah. But I can't I cannot land at Oakland at 1:30 in the morning. I'm so tired. I'm just miserable. Mm-hmm. And my biggest problem is I can stay up late. Like on the first night, I'm good. Yeah. I can't sleep in. Like the hotels, like with the hanger, clip the curtains together. It's pitch black, blah, blah. Wake up at 6. I just can't. And so after on the third day,
You're done.
I'm done. I'm just trash. And that's my curse.
Yeah, I was the opposite. Now, I had an advantage, though, because when I was doing it, I was living on the West Coast and commuting to Chicago.
Oh.
And so I was East Coast time. And I think you almost have to do that because flying AMs and being West Coast based is brutal.
Dude, I used to do that. And you guys would call me coming home from the bars, and I'd be sitting in the cockpit at 5:30 in the morning in the East Coast somewhere getting ready to go. I'm just like, dude, and then I'd come home having woken up the last day super early, fly all day, go to Chicago, commute home. And remember I'd get home in the evening time about time that everybody wanted to go out. So I'd be like, oh, here we go. And I'd look at my watch and be like, I've been up for 24 hours, 25 hours.
So anyways,
miserable.
the whole reason I brought this up is I was curious what crews are doing on the road, because I feel like the types of crews that fly the morning, the AMs like to get up early and get things done. And so they would like to work out in the morning. But if you're flying AMs, you can't do that. So then do you get to the hotel, work out right away? And
some people do.
It's just weird because I feel like the person who would normally work out in the morning is also the person who flies AMs.
Yeah, that's true. That's me, and I work out in the morning, but I also fly AMs. And it's not like I really have a choice or had a choice. They were just junior, and it was the easiest trip for me to pick up, and it worked out. But you know what I'm really looking forward to actually when I go back to, because my current job, I just don't do that many overnights. It's mostly day trips and drop offs and stuff like that. So
hashtag humble brag.
But I am looking forward to doing the Apple Fitness. Have you checked that out? Mm-hmm. That's going to be a really great thing for people that travel for work. Because you can do a really cool workout. You can even do it in the gym or just in your room, and it's like the variety is really good because they're continually releasing new workouts. Like they have a studio, and they it's not like the canned 100 workouts you can choose from, and there's continually new ones. And if you're part of the Apple One, but that's a whole nother show.
It'll be in a gear show, but yeah, you kind of gotta. It's really nice if you have an Apple Watch, and you got to kind of be in the Apple sphere. And I'm sure we're gonna hear from some listeners on some other platforms that have the similar deal where you could, wherever you're at on the road, get on your phone and, I want to do yoga today, or I want to do, a HIIT workout. But I just thought it was interesting to see. I remember I struggled a lot trying to work out when I was commuting to the East Coast. It was really hard because I was getting up so early. And then by the time I get to the hotel, I was so tired in the mid-afternoon that I was just falling asleep. It was really hard for me to want to get and work out.
Yeah, it's always tough for me. The only time that's more motivating is if you're somewhere where you can go for a cool run. Like one of the places like San Francisco, you stay right by the water, which is right by the airport, and there's a path you can run down.
Yeah.
Like that was just something different to look at. And I don't even like running really, but that's the time when I would do it.
Right.
Just because
when in Rome.
Exists, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So curious to hear what our listeners have as far as we're just demanding everything from the listeners today.
We're out of content ourselves, so just kidding.
Curious how people balance that. I like to work out in the morning if I can, either 9 or noon, but I agree with that article from Harvey Watt that was saying, if you try and do it at 5 o'clock, a lot of times your day blows up by then. And
yeah, but some people are into that. I mean, a lot of people work out in the evening, work, have real jobs.
Yeah. So anyways, for more good stuff from Harvey Watt, sign up for their medical bulletin. Comes out once a month. Got a link in there.
It's free. You do not have to be a Harvey Watt paying customer.
Yeah.
But obviously we encourage that because the products they offer are awesome.
That's right. HarveyWatt.com for more information about all of that. All right. Mailbag time. You want to go first?
Of course. You guys have a great podcast, but you seriously need to stop bashing the legacy airline pilots. Much of what you put out is both biased and inaccurate. Domestic flying is not the bread and butter of the majors. International flying, cargo, and passenger is. Flying wide bodies around the world, working 9 days a month for 85 plus hours is actually quite a nice life. By the way, I was a TED pilot back in the day. Laura. Well, I always appreciate when our listeners call us out.
Yeah.
But do you feel like we were bashing legacy airline pilots?
Well, I would say we were painting the picture of what international flying could be in the future in a pretty
negative fashion.
All
right, I'll buy that. Laura, I apologize if we were bashing you, but
No.
she makes a good point. Working 9 days a month for 85 plus hours is quite a nice life.
Yeah, I would agree with her 100%. My opinion is there's just going to be less of those types of positions available.
Well, and
in the
also
future.
two things. All of the wide body stuff goes the most senior for a reason. If it wasn't the best gig at the airline, it wouldn't be going to the most senior people. So to her credit. But the other thing too, that what she says kind of goes to what we're saying is that if there is less international flying, and what she says is that domestic flying is not the bread and butter of the majors, because the domestic flying then assumably is to feed the international flying, right? So then what? That's what we're saying, I suppose, right?
That's what we're saying.
Who knows?
Yeah. So that's going to be the real conundrum, I guess. I think it's more of a devil you know versus a devil you don't, in a way.
Well, if you do it on a broader perspective, what we're always trying to say with this podcast, I think repeatedly, is that don't be naive about how this all works, because everybody is so quick to forget the bad times. And we were saying this as times were good, and then everything went to hell.
Yeah.
But just like anything else, take a step back and a hard look at this business and think of the great things, which there are a ton of, and think of the bad things too when you're making decisions about your career.
Yeah. Yeah. And my thought was, when you're looking at a legacy versus a ULCC, you can look at those aspirational positions in the legacy carrier, and you may or may not. It's possible you may not really ever get there as a captain, and so I think you're kind of trading certainty for uncertainty at the ULCC.
Sure.
From a
I agree.
I know what I'm going to get at the ULCC. The potential, the very top end stuff might not be as good.
Yep. And a lot of factors that go into that is how old you are when you get on, how many, how much time you're going to have, et cetera, et cetera. So being a pilot is still the greatest job in the world. And being an airline pilot, I still think, and I'm sure we'll get hate mail about this, but for the amount of money you can make and the amount of time you work and the amount of actual responsibility you have, and obviously we're responsible for hundreds of people sitting behind us and all of that. But at the end of the day, you're also only responsible for keeping yourself safe, which provides the same result. But if I've always said that the rules of being an airline pilot are just to show up on time, wear what they tell you to wear, and fly the jet like they tell you to fly it. And really, that's it. Like it's a great gig. And
plus the one other thing is the flexibility.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's when you if you take it for what it is and you don't try and make it things it's not, it's great. And if you want to be the great thing too, I think at the airline is that you do have the option. If you want to be an overachiever and do more stuff, that opportunity is there to get into management, a chief pilot, assistant chief pilot, be on the interview team, the hotel committee, whatever you want to do, or be at the union, all that stuff. And if you just want to show up and fly and go home and not worry about anything else, you can do that too. And if you just want to work part-time, you can do that too. And if you want to work time and a half of a job, you can do that too. It's what other job, it's insane. So I want to be very clear. I'm never going to be negative about this business. Yeah. But it can be better if you play it right and you make some informed decisions taking into account all factors.
Yeah. And even an informed decision is still pretty much kind of a crapshoot.
It totally is, because
you can't.
It's an educated guess, as they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
but it's better than a guess. So,
yeah.
It needs to be educated.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Laura. That was a good email. And it's good perspective to remind people, hey, there is still a great job out there, and that's what a lot of people aspire to. And that's what
what we should do? I'd like to interview somebody that's number one on the seniority list at an airline.
Oh, that would be so interesting.
So if anybody knows anybody that's even the top 100, like whatever, close, I think that'd be interesting. So
that would be the opposite of the How I Screwed My Bid Up episode, where it's like how I picked my year. I mean, what time would you spend bidding every month?
5 minutes. It's about the same amount of time you spend bidding when you're in the bottom 10 in your base. Yeah, right. Like me. It takes 2 seconds.
Well, Laura, thank you for the good discussion. That was good. One more email. Also, I got to scroll down here. Hold on. Said, I absolutely loved your discussion about the ULCC hiring and the future of our industry, though I'm going to be that guy with a little trivia. You asked if there would be 2 or 3 legacy airlines around in the next few years, which feeds into a nitpicky misconception about what the legacy airlines are. A legacy airline is any airline that had an interstate route system prior to airline deregulation in 1978. I did not know that.
No, that was
very interesting.
new.
There were many of that time, of course. Most have been absorbed or closed since, leaving Delta, United, American, large and in charge today. However, there is one more. Ooh. Southwest is an easy guess, but they were still intra-Texas at that time of deregulation. So the right answer, did you have it before, as you were reading this, did you have any idea?
Nope.
I had no idea. The right answer is Alaska Airlines, which was operating scheduled flights between Alaska and Washington State in the 1970s, plus many other charter destinations. Hawaiian Airlines, though old, didn't fly to other states until starting flights to LA in the 80s. People also often confuse the term major airline, thinking that it means the same as legacy, but perhaps that's a discussion for another time. I've been loving your podcast, and the furlough flute still plays in my head more often than I care to admit. Thank you for being an asset to our industry. That's debatable, but okay. We'll take it. And that is from our friend Phil Durner. He's the NBAA Western Regional Representative. Phil, here's a flute just for you. Oops, that's not a flute. That's the horn.
Wow, real smooth. Nice.
That was
you
the
crushed.
one I wanted.
You're like Fred North.
I know. So thanks for reaching out, Phil. That was actually really good trivia. A lot of times I don't. Do you get the AOPA Pilot magazine?
Yes.
And they have the trivia in there.
Yes.
The pilot questions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like those because they're just so obscure.
Do you get the AOPA?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The questions are so obscure that you have to know some weird thing, and I don't enjoy those. Like that, what's the BCA? I think is that the corporate pilot one?
Yeah,
where they have like questions about an approach plate or something. I like that, where it's like you can apply it. I don't need to know like what airfield was used in 1938 to train.
Okay, well maybe you should take into consideration that AOPA is written primarily for the recreational pilot.
I know.
Where BCA is for the professional pilot.
I understand, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like you could even do trivia for the recreational pilot.
Well, yeah, but you couldn't do the approach plate because a lot of those guys are just private pilots.
Like, you're flying to an uncontrolled field. They do some of these questions. My point is that...
Are you a professional pilot that thinks everybody else should be a professional pilot? Do you have no patience for the recreational pilot questions?
They're not recreational pilot questions. That's my point. It's not geared towards those types of pilots. It's old trivia about World War I training fields and what was the last blimp to fly. Like, I don't know. Just it's not. Like,
that's just not interesting to you. You just don't like aviation history.
It's not making you a better pilot. It's just kind of like.
Should I take back the 1942 aviation chart of your home state that I gave you for a gift?
My point is, I liked the trivia Phil sent.
No, I'm kidding. I see what you're saying.
Some of the trivia is like you read it and you're like, okay, I don't know what when was the last time Lycoming made it? I'm okay.
That's because you're not a general aviation guy. You're a big shot now.
I know, huge.
I
mean, listen, I'm logging a lot of time
for the
these
rest
days.
of us that still pretend to be general aviation people. I got checked out in 2 days ago. A friend of mine's Cessna 320. You even know what that? You didn't even know what that was before.
Before you told me, no.
So it's a 310, but it's a little bit bigger. It was made to be like a little bigger version of the 310 and carry more stuff. As twin turbocharged TSI 470s, 285 horse apiece.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what, that is the highest workload airplane I've flown in a long time.
Any turbocharged piston airplane is a lot of work. That's all I know.
I tell you what the main problem is that when you're down low, so you take off, you put the gear up, you climb power, you're pulling the props back, they're going wah, wah, wah. So you're trying to, balance them out, and you're watching cylinder head temps and TIT temps and all this. I'll tell you the one thing you're not doing.
Aviating?
You're not looking outside very much at other airplanes, and you're flying out of Deer Valley Airport, and, it's a mess. So I'm looking forward to having somebody else in the right seat, even if it's not a pilot, like somebody else to be like, all right, dude, look out the window until I get to 1,000 feet. Cause it's pretty busy. Like to operate those airplanes properly.
Yeah.
And then the descent planning and it's like no joke.
It's funny because there's such a preference given, especially for people that are making the transition from like flight instructing off into the next step is like, oh, do you have any turbine time? Oh, do you? And when it's like, actually, a turbine engine's pretty easy.
Yeah,
to operate.
There's no
like,
shock cooling. There's no.
It's just where it's like, do you have any like complex piston turbocharge time?
Exactly. That's because the Mooney that I had was the same thing, and now. And it had a TSAO 520, which was more. So that was like an inch every 1,000 feet of power reduction.
I remember that.
These are not quite as sensitive to that, but still, it's there's like a formula of how far out you have to start the descent and the whole like.
You know what? We were thinking about a story for this episode. We should tell the story of our golf trip in the Mooney. Stick around to the end for that one. I don't think the end of the episode is going to be very long from now. That's
a good one.
Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, that's a good point. 320. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it's fast. It's got 6 seats.
Jeez.
It's got good legs. It's expensive to fly, but actually, it's not that bad, really. So how much gas do you think that thing burns in cruise? How fast would you say it goes? I'm just curious, like what's your swing?
Let's say, so in cruise, 20 gallons an hour per motor. So 40 an hour.
Okay, to go how fast?
And 150.
So it burns about 20 to 21 gallons an hour. This is at a pretty lower
per side or total?
Total.
Wow.
About 10 point something when you run at Lena Peak. But that's at lower altitude, and where that airplane really shines is where you need oxygen. And so this one doesn't have oxygen tanks in it because it's a long story, but I'm getting something. But yeah, I was doing like 190 knots on like 21 gallons an hour.
Wow.
So it's not that bad. Really, for a twin, you would think like kind of what you're saying. And if you go high to like 15 or 16, because it's critical or it's altitude, it'll hold sea level power to 16,000. So right in that kind of range. And you're doing like 200 to 225 on like 30 gallons an hour. You're cooking.
That's pretty good.
I know. That's what I said. And you're hauling 6 people. Like the thing has a really good useful load. Like you can actually put 6 people, not all 6 big people, but and a lot of gas and some stuff and go. So
how many 320s are even out there? I've never even heard of one.
I read something about, I don't remember, not that many.
That sounds like an AOPA pilot trivia question. The Cessna 320 was made between...
The Sky Knight is what it's called.
Is it really?
It's awesome. But anyway, it reminds you, I'm like, this is legit.
Interesting. You got to, it's easy to land.
Lands like any other small airplane.
Okay.
I don't know. Look down at the end of the runway and just land.
Just do it. Put it on the ground. You better do it.
Just do it.
Well, today, Max, we're going to do a little professional development discussion, especially for business aviation pilots. A little recap of our webinar we had with our friends at the Small Flight Department earlier this week.
And our boy, Phil Durner.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, I guess he was more...
He was pulling the strings. But speaking of professional development, did you know that our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy have some courses for professional development for business aviation pilots? It's accredited by the NBAA. Even you can get credit for the
you get CAM credit?
Yeah. Oh. So it's pretty cool. They get a course on human factors, an international operations course. So pretty cool stuff. But I didn't even realize that you could get that too. So it's more than just the 135 recurrent training stuff that they offer.
Well, not only that stuff, but there's a ton of other stuff that's great for professional development. Which we talked about runway overruns and all that stuff.
Yeah,
so
lots of good stuff. We're just starting to dig into the catalog that they've got. So I'm looking forward to exploring more about what they've got to offer. aircrewacademy.com is the website. You can check out all of the different offerings for professional pilots there.
I love it.
So we had the opportunity to participate in a discussion with some other folks on a series on communicating with your principal. So this was focused on business aviation folks, and it was sponsored by the Small Flight Department Committee that NBAA has, which I am a member of. They invited Max to be a panelist. I was the moderator. which was good. It kept me to a minimum and kept the professionals going, offering some insight. So thought maybe we'd just talk a little bit about the discussion and what we learned and maybe share a couple gems.
Yeah, I thought I was a good panelist because the last two principles that I've worked for, which is in running the whole show, capacity, couldn't be more different people. And that's a lot of managing the principal is a personality thing. Yeah. And whether you have the personality, you can work with different personalities, or you don't with certain ones, and how that all plays out. But the my previous job, the principal on that, who I got along with great, but he's very type A, wants things his way, and it kind of will manipulate to get that, or push you in a direction you don't want to go to try and do something he wants to do. And the one that I work for now is the nicest guy ever. He's just is very chill, laid back, go with the flow. Okay, yeah, well, sure, we'll just do it a different day, or kind of whatever. Yeah, he's just the nicest dude in the world, and so it's given me, I think, good perspective, at least recently, between those two guys, and you manage those as a department manager very differently. But we had some other great panels too that had a lot of really good information. I don't know. What did you think were some of the big takeaways? Okay, so I kind of helped create this panel a little bit. And so what I was hoping, what you talked about, was that you're in a much smaller operation where it's more you and the high net worth individual. There isn't a lot of corporate structure. And so what we did is we had another panelist, Jim Lara, who I'm going to steal one of his points here in just a second. He had some really great stuff, and he's a consultant that will go in and talk with larger flight departments a little bit, and that's in a more structured thing. So I think that was really glad. I'm glad we had kind of that dynamic. Yeah, that was good contrast. But Jim had some great points that he shared in that webinar. I'm just going to share one of his main topics, and we'll have a link to his website. I highly recommend you check his stuff out, and we'll probably have him in the show soon. It's a Greystone Advisors. But Jim said he talked to executives. So this is not the flight department people. This is company executives. And he said, what are the problems that I see from flight department managers when they come in and communicate? And he said the biggest thing they saw that the executive or the high net worth individual said is, he said, I asked my director a question, meaning that the chief pilot or the aviation director, and all I wanted was the answer. But instead they get this huge explanation of, well, the weather and this, and there's a cold front moving in, and or whatever. And what I kind of chimed in too, I think a lot of that is when the pilot or the manager or whatever is intimidated by the principal. So they dance around something that is going to be expensive that they have to buy, or the weather's bad and they can't go to whatever the bad news is. A lot of times people will dance around it for an hour before they get to the point. And it's like, they don't want that. I take my thing was I'm like, listen, just be direct, lay it out there, be honest, and then provide some sort of solution if there's one available. I mean, sometimes if you need a new air cycle machine for $80,000, say, listen, I shopped it. You found the best I could. This is the overhauled one. This is the best price you can get. Yeah. It's the best I could do. Yeah. Or if it's the weather's bad, don't just say the weather's bad. We can't go. Sorry. What do you want to do? It's like, unfortunately, the weather in Aspen is lower than we can safely operate in. So we're going to have to go to Grand Junction. Good news is I've already got transportation lined up, blah, blah, blah. I'll reposition the airplane when the weather clears up in 2 days per the forecast. Sound good? Great. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Those kind of things. Exactly. And I think the other thing too, there's an adage about if somebody's lying to you, they'll usually provide way more information than they need to because they're trying to convince you. And I don't think it's so much the lying. I think it's when a pilot maybe isn't as confident as he should be in a decision, or he knows the decision, but he's not confident in himself to make it. And then that's why they try and prevent more information than they need to, when it's basically just, here's why we got to do this. And I would say most of the time, in my experience, that's all they just need the answer. They don't care. Well, and if they do care, like my previous principal, he'd had an airplane long enough and dealt with this stuff. Like, he kind of liked to get a little bit in the weeds about like maintenance stuff and things you wouldn't expect. But I didn't drag him into the weeds.
Yeah.
I'd say, here's the deal. And he'd say, well, have we looked at this? Have you looked at an overhaul one? What about, did you call he called it the Gulfstream Junkyard, which is like a used part place. Did you call the Gulfstream Junkyard? Can you get one from there? Is that any good? And I'm just like, I thought about that. Here's why we didn't do that. No, here's why we didn't do that. Well, are you sure? Now, was somebody there watching them? Did they? But if he wants to go on a walk through the weeds, you take him on a walk through the weeds. But you give them make that their decision. Don't make it for them.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that time and time again from guys. And in my perspective, it usually starts with a lack of confidence in the manager. So self-confidence. I mean, so anyways, that was point one. Start with the answer, then go from there if they want more. Number 2 says occasionally the chief pilot or the director is going to meet with the owner, the principal, the high net worth individual. His advice when you do the meeting request, maybe it's directly with him or her, or it's maybe with their admin. It says always provide an agenda or outline in front of the meeting and limit the agenda to 3 points. I used to make a lot of mistakes. My first time managing an airplane, I would just send these really long emails to the principal and be like, all right, here are like the 9 things that we need to get
You could
done.
just hear him right now rolling his eyes going,
And especially the guy that I flew for didn't care anything about, like he was one of those guys, you call him, you run one thing by him and the phone conversation needs to be over in like 120 seconds or less. And I was making the dumb mistake of like these well thought out long emails and here's the 7 ways we can do this and the link to, and it was just so dumb. But I didn't, I was early in my journey and I was trying to approach it from my perspective and not from their perspective. So I thought that was pretty good. I think in general, if you can limit to 3 items and give them an agenda beforehand, I thought that was a good point.
Can you pull up one of these old emails?
Oh
Maybe
my
we
God,
could
I
read on there.
should.
I know you have it because you've had this. You can pull up these old Gmail emails.
my
I've seen you
God.
do it from like 100 years ago.
Should I pause the show? Should we try and find one?
No, we'll read it on the next one.
Oh,
But
it'll
it's
be
just
so embarrassing.
I just know, and I know you because I've sometimes been hard on you about like when you're going to go meet with or have that. Mostly when you're going to have an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah,
because I'm like, listen, dude, here's the deal. Do not feel bad for the rich guy.
Yeah,
tell him the truth. Be honest. Lay it out and get out.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, get in there. I'm like, I feel like I'm sending you into the football game.
That's exactly right. A little pregame coaching. Max's career services and Cessna 320 checkout services will be available. New sponsor. But anyway, so I thought that was good. And then he says, once you're in the meeting with that principal, he says, discuss what's meaningful or relevant to the principal. So it come from their perspective. Hey, we're down for maintenance or this or that, and this is how it's going to affect you. Or why should you care, I guess, is another way you can phrase everything that you're going to talk to them from there. And then along with that, another way you can ask is, so what? What does this matter when you're telling them? Put a little empathy in there. And then he said the other thing that pilots often do is struggle to provide a relative information. So they'll tell the example he used, again, I'm stealing all.
Relevant?
Yeah. No, relative. So, for example, when you tell the principal the fuel price is $4.50, and they go,
okay.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Is that good or bad?
Did we get ripped off, or is that a good deal?
Yeah, right.
Like what?
So he said when you're working with numbers, a lot of times, then you kind of have to give some context and be like, hey, this is the average. This is what we're doing. So, anyways, so some pretty good pointers. I thought some of that's pretty obvious. It wasn't obvious to me back when
no, it certainly wasn't. And a lot of things too. It's just everybody's so different. So there's no blanket way to do this. Like a budget. Some people want a budget that's very accurate. Some people could care less about a budget. And even one of the points I made too is even when you're building a budget, you have to figure out what's important to them. Yeah. As far as, are you trying to run the operation the most economically as you can, or are you trying to run it as consistent as you can, so there's no big unexpected things to pop up, which you can change based on the amount of engine programs and parts programs you're on, and you can fix those costs. Is it more expensive in the long run? A lot of times, that's kind of a roll of the dice. But if not, then you may have to stroke a check for a $60,000 windshield once in a while, or whatever. So those are some other things too. It's not all about the numbers; it's about what you can do to control those numbers and the consistency of those too. You got to ask those questions. One of the things I did say, those guys that don't want a budget, don't be confusing that with the fact that they don't care what it costs. Because I stole one of your famous quotes of, there's only one reason we all don't have G5s.
Right.
And that's because of the cost. And so if the cost outweighs the benefit, that's your biggest risk as a corporate aviator. And whether they don't care about the budget as much and forecasting those costs, everybody cares about the costs, period. And whether they may, what I like to say is they're either prospective or what's the opposite?
Retroactive?
No, retrospective.
Okay.
Where they care about forecasting those costs, or you ask them to write a big check and all of a sudden they start looking back at what everything cost.
Yeah.
Either way, they're going to care about what it costs. So the best advice always is to be able to support every penny you spend, whether that's your blowout dinner you have when you pass your check ride at flight safety that you put on the company card, or every dollar you spend, make sure you can support that with why you did that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the rule I've always lived by. And even with splurging on expense accounts and stuff, I kind of had an agreement about that too. About I worked really hard to bulldog getting parts and keeping on top of maintenance and being very aggressive on reviewing bills and stuff like that, and just making sure, because there's a lot of abuse and people people get away with what they can. And so those, I would say, the big dollars. And in turn, the boss knew not to hassle me about nice dinners or a bottle of wine or something like that. And that was just kind of the agreement I had with him.
Right.
Because we were kind of buddies too. So it's kind of a different situation. But
I think what a lot of what we're saying boils down to the director or the chief pilot's ability to determine the personality and the values of the folks he's working for. And that's not something you're going to learn in flight school. And not everybody is as perceptive about that either. That's, I think, one of the core challenges of really as running an operation is when you're getting in there, especially if you're new to an operation, is figuring out what is the value that we're providing to these folks and what makes them tick. And I think the more time you can spend doing that, the more valuable you'll be to them.
For sure. And that's why not all pilots are great managers.
Exactly.
And that takes a certain person.
Yeah.
And to do that repeatedly and be a good manager with different personalities and
that's
stuff.
The real.
That's a people skill. That's not an aviation skill.
Yeah.
And that's and a business skill too, about how to.
And I would take that a step
business.
further. I think there are guys that are great managers that would be set up in a corporate operation with lots of layers of corporate, bureaucracy. And you put that same guy in the situation flying for a high net worth individual, it's not going to work.
It's a different deal.
Yeah, which is just another layer of why corporate aviation is so dynamic. And it's so awesome if you can find the right fit. There's nothing better, but finding that right fit can be so challenging.
Yeah.
So we got into that a little bit, but I thought perceiving personalities is really
one of the other things too that I've just seen a lot, and this is all pilots, all professional pilots, airline guys and gals, and corporate and everything in between, is that everybody screws up at some point.
Yes.
And makes an error. And a lot of people I've seen try to cover it up, especially with knowing that the non-aviation principal or boss or whoever doesn't, you can bury stuff in a lot of aviation jargon and stuff but more often than not, people can smell when
they're getting BS'd.
Getting BS'd. And a lot of times I've seen too, where they maybe get away with it then, but even a month or 2 months or a year later, something happens where they're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so that's another time where honesty is the best policy. Be like, listen, here's what I did. I made a mistake, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it and prevent it from happening again. And you put your tail between your legs and you walk away, and everything usually works out all right.
And it's an easy trap to fall into because you as the pilot want them to always have 100% confidence in you because there is a safety and a trusting of your life in their hands. And so it's a fine line to walk because you don't want to be that person that's like, wait, if they start questioning me or I make myself look like I made a mistake, then they're never going to get in the plane with me again. So
but I tell you, if they catch you lying though,
yes,
the adverse reaction is much stronger. So
it's another that's another comes back to self-confidence. on that one too.
Yep.
So yeah, we really had a really good discussion on this.
That just scratches the surface, like we oftentimes do. If you want to really dive in, you're going to have to watch the webinar. So how do people get to that?
So I'll have a link. Here's the one caveat. Right now, you have to be an NBAA member to view it. If you're not an NBAA member, you can't see it right now. We're working on trying to get this one released to the general public. So if it's released to everybody, then we'll have those links for folks. I just think it's a great study for somebody that's thinking, do I want to make a career in business aviation? Even if you're not a manager yet, the discussion and a little bit of like what we have said really opens your eyes to the types of things you need to start working on and being aware of.
Well, I think the other thing it's really valuable for is people like yourself when you're writing these big, long emails.
Yeah.
Is if you start as a pilot, a line pilot in corporate aviation, then you have an opportunity to become a management guy or run the show. That's where I wish I would have listened to one of these back then, because a lot of these lessons are learned the hard way.
Yeah, you got to learn it the hard way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyways, check that out. We'll have a link for it. Highly recommend it. And love to hear your advice on communicating with the principal. It's an art. And the funny thing is, you can have a great strategy for one operation, and it may be completely different for the next one. So for people that enjoy new challenges, that's awesome. All right. So let's see here, Max. Quick update before we go on your airplane.
Oh, yes. Wow. A lot of things have actually happened since building an airplane is one of those things you can work for months and it doesn't look like much happened. And then there's these sometimes when a lot of appreciable change happens in a short period. So since we spoke last, I've been wiring up the whole avionics system, autopilot servos and all kinds of stuff, right? Rewiring the entire thing. And so I finished wiring everything this week. And then it's time to turn it on and put it in config mode and check the system, right? To see if, and it's pretty basic. It comes up with every component, which there's tons of, and it has a green check mark next to it. If it says like it's there, it's on the network, it's working, there's no problem, it's pretty smart. And this is a lot of this wiring too, is you run a bunch of wires and then you take a connector and you put pins on the end and you look at a wiring diagram. Okay, trim out goes to pin 9 and 10. And trim in goes to pins 3 and 4. And CAN bus high and CAN bus low go to pin 1 and 2. And you put all these pins in. So you screw up one pin somewhere, it's not going to work. And the data network's all daisy chain. So if you screw up one somewhere, it's going to screw up all down the line. So it's a whole thing. So I was turning it on. I'm like, this is probably 50-50 whether.
Well, you should tell folks with the extra added complication that you bring to the table with all these colored wires.
Oh, yeah. So a lot of the wires that come out, they say it's a white wire. It has a little stripe on it.
Yeah.
And these are like a 3-conductor shielded wire. So it's 3 little wires in it and then like a shield around it. So yeah, a lot of times the diagram says the red, orange, or the red hooks to blue on this trim servo.
Yeah.
The orange hooks to green and the whatever hooks to whatever. And the problem is I'm colorblind. And so, and a lot of times you're working in the tail of the airplane or other places, and there's not a lot of light, which exacerbates the problem. And so anyway, I just make sure I have a lot of light. And sometimes if it's like orange and red, I'm like, and I like open the hanger door all the way, make sure I get like in the natural light. I'm like, okay, this is definitely orange. So,
are you building an airplane, but you can't tell the difference between brown and green?
Do you wonder what other first world problems you have?
There are others out there suffering.
Did you stain the seat on your Mercedes?
Can you, let me ask you a question. When you see that, the red and green lights, wingtip, like the position lights, do those look pretty similar to you?
No.
Those are easy to tell.
Most of I'm not that colorblind, and most of the stuff is okay. It's like dark red and brown, like stuff that's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, right.
And greens and grays.
Yeah.
Like I had to take a practical test with the FAA to get a waiver for this whole deal.
Right.
So
yeah, you mentioned that before. Yeah.
So anyway, I plug it all in, I turn it on, and everything has a green check. I was like, no way, this is all right. And so that was good news. So that's cool, and the screens all light up, and it's all the gee whiz stuff is there.
Yeah.
And then my motor is done. So we flew up in the 320 I was telling you about to get checked out. We flew up to Kingman where it's at and watched it run on the test stand, which is pretty cool. I took a cool video. It's just neat to hear this motor you've been talking about forever actually run, and it's big 9-cylinder radial. It sounds cool and the whole deal. So you can post that video if you want. If anyone cares. And then the third thing, since we last talked to you, so I hooked up the elevator trim. There's multiple connectors, like from the airframe to the connector that goes through the elevator, and then a connector through to the trim servo, which is a bunch. It's like 6 pins or 6 in each one. So you got to make sure all of the wires you pinned it out correctly, right? So I'm crimping on all this stuff and make it all together. And then it's like, okay, it's time to test the trim. So I flip it on, hit the trim, and nothing happens. And I'm like,
like nothing happens on the screen?
No,
nothing happens
the trim
on
servo isn't moving.
Okay.
So I'm like, all right. So let's start at my same thing I said before. Start at the simplest thing. So I'm like, well, maybe the trim servo broke. So I take the connector off. I hook a multimeter up to the power leads that would show voltage, and I click it, no voltage. So I'm like, all right, well, I probably screwed up a connector. Yeah. So I go through all the connectors of the flashlight, check all the colors I can't see anyway, make sure I didn't make an error there, and everything looks good. And then I go to the cockpit, and you click it, and there's a mixing board because there's 2 electric trim switches. Yeah. So if you both do it at the same time, you got to have something in there that tells it what to do. And it has little relays in it. And so I can hear it when I actuate the trim, I hear it clicking. So that means that there's power and the switch is working, right? So I'm like, dude. And the panel's in the airplane, which makes them, there's a whole bunch of boxes stuff back there. So I'm on a ladder through where the windshield would go with a multimeter now on these teeny little screws that are probably, 2 millimeters wide on this little board. And I check it. It has power, like I thought. I'm like, okay, great. And then I find the 2, and I have to go on the internet, find the wiring diagram, and download it. I look at the 2 and the outputs, and I check them, and and somehow I hold it with one hand, reach through over and grab the stick because it's just me, and I hit the trim, and I hear the relays click, but there's no voltage output. So I'm like, all right. So then I finally call the avionics dude that pre-wired all this panel. I'm like, here's what my troubleshooting path was. Here's the wiring diagram. I sent it to him because it's kind of this convoluted one. I'm like, it should be output on 6 and 7, right? I should have voltage when I actuate the trim. And he's like, yeah, that's the way it is. And I'm like, so is the board faulty, or did you check this before you sent it? And he's like, there wasn't really a way to check it. You can't check everything until it's in the plane. So we go through the whole thing, and then he had to go. He's like, I'll call you back later, and we'll figure this out. And I sit down. And this is like when you got to go to the refrigerator and you grab a beer and you sit down and you're just like, all right, let's just take a break and think about this. So I sit there and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, either something's wrong with that board or something we're missing. So I pull out this convoluted wire diagram, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, wait a minute. The power that goes in that's hooked up is only in one spot. And it's to actuate the coil for the relays, right? And I'm looking at the diagram, I'm like, there's no power. Like, those relays are closing, but they're not connecting power to anything. And so you had to run power to 2 more spots that the avionics guy didn't run. He just screwed up. He just overlooked it. And then I finally figured it out, and then I had to go because I had to go do something. So I know. So I'm 99% sure that's what it is. I haven't been able to go back and put the wires in and see if it works. But it's just one of those things where it's like, some days there's victories and you're like, you surprise yourself. You're like, wow, that actually worked. That's awesome. And then some days it's just plug and play, and it should work, and it doesn't. And then you spend 2 hours troubleshooting it and getting really pissed off. And then it's always great when you can then fix it and finish that and then leave for the day. And then but when you find it and you can't fix it and you don't know for sure that that's what the deal is. Yeah. It just.
This experience has really reinforced in me that I never want to build an airplane.
But it's fun. But there's also the sense of accomplishment when you properly troubleshoot something.
Yes.
And I felt like looking
rewarding.
back, I was like, I really, and you learn from that too, because that's a relatively simple problem. And if there's other problems can be infinitely more complicated, and it's the steps you take in troubleshooting those problems it's a learning curve. And luckily I've done it on other stuff, but So anyway, I was happy with that I took the right path and got to the bottom of the problem in a day or in a couple hours. But it's interesting how it pans out sometimes.
Yeah. Well, keep us posted. This thing could be in the air in just a couple more months.
Yeah, we got to go pick up the motor. Hopefully next week, bring it down, and I should have everything else ready for then us to put the motor on.
Don't say a date. Don't jinx yourself.
I won't. That's you don't ever do that.
You
when you're building an
never
airplane.
do that.
But we should be able to put the motor on and then start hooking up fuel, oil lines, electrical sensors, all that stuff.
Sweet. All right. Well, we'll post a couple pictures of the airplane. The panel is really, you did an awesome job. So I'll post a picture of that too. That's pretty sweet. All right. Let's get out of here. Quick story beforehand. More GA. A lot of GA today. You had a Mooney that I won't even go into the story, but essentially somehow somebody let you fly their Mooney around. The airplane was awesome. It was a Mooney rocket, right?
Yeah.
And
which
it was
is
just,
it's a Mooney with a STC to put a turbocharged 520 in it.
it was like flying a King Air. I was flying a King Air at the time. It was like, it performed like a King Air. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it's awesome. It goes 200 knots.
It is ridiculous.
Incredible airplane.
So we decided we were going to go play golf with some friends about an hour away. We flew off in the morning. Oh, you rigged
Not
up
an hour. It was like 30 minutes in that thing.
Yeah, that's true. You rigged up like this homemade air conditioner out of like a cooler and ice cube.
Well, it's the one they sell for $600
from Sporties.
Yeah, and I remember I was on Southwest flying home in the back, and I had internet because I was the A+.
Yeah.
I'm like, I think I could build it. And I went on Amazon in like 20 minutes and bought all the parts and made it for. Like
it worked
$100.
awesome.
Oh yeah, it works great.
So we had this like homemade air conditioner, and it was summertime. So we flew off, played golf, and then flew back in the afternoon back to Scottsdale, coming in. And yeah, it was a 20-minute flight. I mean, it was awesome because it saved a ton of time.
It's the middle of the day, though. It's hot.
120 degrees. We land, we taxi in, and right after we clear the runway, we just hear, boom!
Poof, and the airplane settles to the right. You're just like, oh no. I guess we popped a tire. So we're disabled. We're the disabled single engine guy on the taxiway.
Yeah. Fortunately, we were on the taxiway, though.
There's nothing more dangerous in a single engine airplane than two professional pilots.
Yeah,
exactly. But we didn't do anything wrong.
No.
Which was interesting because I'm like, and that airplane is very nose heavy. It's very forward CG. We have both of us in the airplane. And the first thing I thought, it's really easy to lock up the main gear. But we had a bunch of ballast in the back on top of our golf bags. So we were in CG, and I was like, but I'm like, but it would have blown on the runway. Like, you've seen people lock up tires and wear a hole through and blow it. It would have blown on the runway, not, 10 seconds after we exited, 5 to 10 seconds, whatever it was. So, so we had to call ground, and we get out, and we're standing on the taxiway like a couple of idiots, and the tire's just flat.
It's just a flat tire, and it's 102. I mean, it's 3:00 on a Phoenix afternoon. I mean, it is so hot. We're just standing out there. We've been playing golf all day, so it's already like been in the sun.
And airport ops shows up, and they're like,
"You got to get this thing out of here."
And I'm like, yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate the.
No kidding. Yeah, and they didn't have the dolly to move the airplane.
It was the gear door. There's a little dolly that they have.
Yeah,
and you basically pull the airplane up on the flat tire, and it has little casting wheels or whatever. But we couldn't use it because the gear door is too low to the ground. The Moonies are pretty squatty, so that wouldn't work. And I'm like, we're like trying. I'm like, I don't know what we're gonna do, dude. And we finally call this one mechanic that we knew of, that I knew of, and he happened to be there, and he happened to have a tube, like an old used tube for that size. So he just came out. We put a wing jack on it, took the tire off. We left it on the taxiway and a wing jack. Went back to the shop, popped the new tube in it, came back, popped the tube.
It was like 2 hours probably of just. So we saved a ton of time flying.
Time
that
to spare. Go by air. We saved a ton of time, and we spent 4 times as much money as we needed to. And it was great.
So you must be excited to be getting back into general aviation. It's going to be so amazing. You're going to save so much time. Anyways, well, that will do it for our abbreviated episode here.
It's not abbreviated.
I don't know. I guess it's not. It's actually went pretty long. Never underestimate the power of us to, ramble along. I want to thank our sponsors, Harvey Watt, the provider of loss of medical and life insurance for professional pilots in whatever industry you're in. And our friends at the Advanced Aircrew Academy, aircrewacademy.com. All of the training you need as a professional pilot. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. We got to hear those bidding stories. We're primed on that.
Don't let us down.
Yeah.
We know they're out there.
We got a couple. we need moss, but it's going to be a good segment. So we're looking forward to that. But until then,
Always remember,
flexibility.
it's the key to air power.
Rock on.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.